And you know what's crazy? They tried to erase her history. Hazel Scott was such a piano virtuoso that she was accepted into Juilliard School of Music at the age of 8 as a private student, even though the age of entry was 16. Before the age of 20, she made her stage debut opposite of Count Basie, hosted her own radio show as a result of winning a local competition, got her start on Broadway, and became a headliner at New York's first integrated nightclub, Cafe Society. She was unique in the sense that she wasn't all classical. She was also jazz, and she'd often marry the two, starting a classical opus, say from Bach in its original form, and gradually adding in jazz elements until it became a full-on swing tune to dance to. Scott was known to sell out legendary theaters like Carnegie Hall, starred in 5 Hollywood films, and before Nat King Cole or Oprah, she hosted her own network television show, the first black person to do so. Her family was considered Harlem royalty, her mother Alma being a phenomenal pianist herself, with friends like Fats Waller, Art Tatum, and Billie Holiday that Hazel grew up knowing basically as family. Her husband Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was the first black congressman from New York and a strong asset to the civil rights movement. Earning the equivalent of $1 million today, Hazel could have very easily been like some of her black contemporaries who turned a blind eye to denigration in exchange for fame. But she knew her worth and accepted nothing that contradicted that. She had a clause in her contract that she would not perform to segregated crowds, which was rare at the time. And film, she would not play subservient roles. In fact, she would only play herself, demanding the credit Hazel Scott as herself. Picked her own wardrobe, required a fee of $4,000 a week, which was what her white counterparts were making. And once when she walked on set to film and saw a group of black female extras dressed in maid attire for a musical number where they'd be sending their husbands off to serve the country, she got into an exchange with the director over how demeaning and non-representative it was of black women, mind you, women in general, to send their husbands off in dirty aprons. When he refused to change the costumes, she refused to show up to set for 3 days before they relented and dressed the women in more formal attire. From the moment Hazel Scott got money and influence, she used it to advocate for black people. And the bolder she got, it ruffled the wrong feathers. In 1949, she won a federal lawsuit against a Washington restaurant after they refused service and donated all the funds of the win to the NAACP. Just like the dress situation, it wasn't about her. You know, if we go back to that situation, actually, remember, in her clause, she had input on what she wore. So she could have just turned a blind eye and been like, you know, it ain't got nothing to do with me. In the case of the restaurant, she didn't even live in Washington. She was just passing through while traveling. So she could have, again, just turned a blind eye. But she made a point to use her influence for those extras who didn't feel that they had the voice, for those Washington natives who didn't feel they had the voice. It comes as no surprise, though, that in 1950, a year after the lawsuit, despite the response from her show going over so well that she went from 1 show a week to 3 and from airing in New York only to nationally, that it only took a week for it to be canceled after Hazel was listed in the Red Channels, a pamphlet that called out celebrities in film and radio for being potential communists. A time when the worst thing you could be labeled was a communist. It was career ending. Hazel walked directly into the current, insisting to testify before the House of Un-American Activities Committee to clear her name against the advice of her husband and advisors. They listed off all these organizations she'd performed for that were affiliated with communism. Mind you, she hadn't heard of any of these organizations besides one, and that one she didn't even know its political affiliation. She stood firm on the fact that she was not a communist. But even with all that, it had already been decided it was time to silence Scott. Hazel Scott was blackballed and her career never recovered. In fact, there were 2 instances where she took excess pills to just escape the blows of life. Her story exposes why so many celebrities fear being anything but a circus act, because the cost of going outside of those lines is that if you upset the wrong persons, they won't stop at ending your career. They will attempt to erase you, similar to how they tried to erase Hazel's contributions to jazz, film, and television.